Hello, my name is Chris Pachuta, and I'm the Senior Business Development Analyst here at PSD. And I wanted to thank everybody for attending our second PSD Expert Insights event. Our presentation today will be the intersection of healthy homes and weatherization. I did want to note that we are recording this event, and you can post any questions that you may have in the questions box, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. And the event is also eligible for continuing education units, so please make sure to post your name and BPI number in the chat, and we will make sure you receive credit for attending. And with that, I will pass this over to Shane.
Okay, thanks so much, Chris. It's great to see everybody virtually on here. I'm seeing the attendees list and seeing many familiar names and some not so familiar, so welcome. If this is our first interaction, it's great to have you here. So my name is Shane Gulick. I'm the Director of QA Services here at PSD. I work with Charles Illich, who is our Principal Inspector in our New Jersey programs. We focus primarily in low to moderate income utility weatherization programs, doing inspections and consulting our clients in that area. And in addition to that, so Charles, his expertise is not only as a principal inspector in this environment, it's also, he comes from the healthy home background. So Charles is bringing many years of experience with this, and he's going to kick this thing off for us. So Charles, without further ado.
Thanks, Shane. Good afternoon, all. My name is Charles Illich. Again, I'm the Principal Inspector for the New Jersey Comfort Partners program. That's an income qualified utility program. I also had the pleasure of being a presenter for ILS when ILS had the Healthy Homes affiliate training, which was sponsored by a HUD grant. And it was in 2012, 2013. So both of these programs, Healthy Homes and Weatherization, are programs which are near and dear to my heart. And I was very glad when Chris and Shane approached me about doing this webinar, because I see real corollaries between all the work I've done, past and present. And that's one of the things we want to bring to bear here, is that these programs have objectives that dovetail together really well, and that's what we're going to discuss going forward. So I'm going to start off with the first slide.
Yep.
So healthy homes, basically what makes a healthy home. So according to the National Center for Healthy Homes, a healthy home is one that is dry, clean, safe, ventilated, free of pests and contaminants. It's well maintained. It has good thermal control. And in addition, homes should be affordable and accessible to all people, regardless of their age or their abilities. So the National Healthy Homes Center is a leading nonprofit organization that's solely dedicated to establishing healthy and safe homes for people across income levels. And they do research, advocacy, training, and capacity building. According to Healthy Homes website, they're concerned about more than 6 million families still living in substandard housing. They are the leaders in public health, housing, and environmental sectors with data, tools, policies, best practices, and the need to improve housing quality in their communities. So the 10 principles that they train on are: keep a house dry, keep it clean, keep it pest-free, keep it well ventilated, contaminant-free, safe, well-maintained, thermally controlled, accessible, and affordable. As you can see, it deals with all housing stocks across all income levels. But the major concern that I had when I was with ILS was HUD housing and the effects that that housing stock was having on children who were with respiratory illnesses, especially asthma, and even adults who had respiratory illnesses and asthma. So the healthy home principle about being dry. So water damage is actually something that we see in both healthy homes and weatherization. Wet, damp, water damaged homes are going to be breeding grounds for pests such as cockroaches, rodents, dust mites. They're going to contribute to asthma and allergies and other respiratory illnesses that the occupants have. These housing conditions play a significant role in the respiratory health of the occupants, and these hazards could be greatly increased and intensified it could really intensify their illnesses. So our concern at ISLES when we did this training was that you could send children back from a clinic visit or an ER visit with a bucket full of medications, and it wasn't going to do any good if there were triggers in the house that were going to overwhelm them within a matter of days. So damp houses provide a nurturing environment for mites, roaches, rodents, and mold, all of which are associated with asthma. Moisture issues are basically in two categories: bulk moisture from roof leaks, foundation groundwater, infiltration, and plumbing leaks in a home, and persistent condensation. As you can see from our graph, rainwater coming down should shed off the roof. If you have roof leaks, now you have an issue with moisture in attic and walls. It's basically shed off to the ground. If you don't have good grading, or if you're not using gutters and gutter leaders to move it away from the foundation, you have foundation infiltration. And groundwater, some homes just happen to be on low spots in neighborhoods where groundwater seepage is an issue. You're going to have groundwater constantly percolating up through the slab. And then there are the internal moisture sources, such as showers, washers and dryers, hanging laundry. And one which was not included in this graphic, which is also a concern on the topic, is moisture from cooking, especially if you don't have a range hood or exhaust system, which is going to move that moisture out of the house. When we did this training at ISLES, a lot of our participants were people who were going to be making home visits. So they were public health and housing organizations, they were health associates, they were health providers, visiting nurses, etc. We also had a fair amount of policymakers, government agencies, research, and academic community, some foundation and corporations, and we even had some families and consumers who would take the training. So I'm going to pass this off to Shane, who can give us a much deeper dive into what the weatherization impacts are for this first tenet, which is keeping the home dry.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Charles. I think just to start this out, one of the most important things to recognize is that ultimately weatherization efforts, in the utility world and in the state world, they ultimately lead to creating healthy homes. So, I see many faces in here that I'm familiar with, contractors in the industry, and I think about your work. I think about the work we've done together through the years. And the weatherization, again, we often lose sight of this. To us, it's another attic to blow. It's another crawl space to treat, right? But in a lot of ways, it's really a system. We're looking at that house as a system, and we're evaluating that house as a system in order to keep it dry, right? So part of that evaluation, they're really designed ultimately to be comprehensive and totally inclusive. Weatherization program audit evaluations typically include baseload and seasonal energy consumption evaluations. We look for building shell improvement opportunities. We evaluate the customer habits. We develop a work scope, whether it's an energy model or whether it's through working a priority list. But even while all of that's going on, as we're doing all of these evaluations, we're constantly conducting a health and safety evaluation and looking for ways to remediate them. Some of the issues that come up are roof leaks, bulk moisture occurrences, and honestly, so much more. And we're going to dive into a little bit more of those barriers here, the health and safety issues that come up during these weatherization events on that next slide. So some of the barriers that prevent us from installing air sealing and insulation measures, and this is obviously not a one-stop shop list. This list goes on, as you all are very familiar with. But we see anything from active roof leaks, plumbing leaks, foundation leaks, bulk water entry through that foundation, standing water in basements or crawl spaces, persistent condensation on windows, walls, ducts, and cold water pipes. There can be electrical issues. Everybody's favorite friend is knob and tube wiring, right? There can be combustion safety concerns, and there can be so much more, right? Again, as weatherization professionals and energy efficiency professionals, part of understanding and creating a healthy home for the occupants is understanding all of the issues that are going on in the home. Sometimes these issues are very overwhelming. Sometimes there are, too many issues for us to actually be able to work through. But ultimately, I think it comes down to coordinating efforts to create the healthy homes, right? You've got to come at your approach to weatherization, not only from the audit evaluation, but from the crew side, from the field staff side, is ultimately figuring out how do we work through those barriers? How do we get, what do the barriers do to the work that we're trying to do? So next, we're going to take a look at the impacts on barriers from these weatherization programs. So ultimately, the thing to remember is that utility and state-funded weatherization programs, they might have limited health and safety spending available. So this makes it kind of complicated for you as a weatherization agency or a contractor to solve all of these problems. And sometimes, again, those problems can be very simple or straightforward, or sometimes they can be a complex spider web of issues. So your job is to really try and figure out how to navigate this space and install the most measures that you can while improving that customer's home efficiency. Ultimately, in the end, you're creating a more healthy home for the occupants. So some of the barriers that we see, with the funding, around the funding, is that we can only do limited roof repairs that allow weatherization work to proceed. I know that there's a contractor in Pennsylvania that has worked, that I've worked with in the past, that has contracted local Amish crews to go out and replace roofs in ways that reduce the cost on the program, and it actually allowed them to work through that barrier. But ultimately, we all know roof replacements are very common and they're very expensive. Plumbing repairs at sinks, it could be something simple like a leaking trap underneath of the kitchen sink, or boilers and water distribution systems, water heaters, your standalone DHWs, water lines. They all can be leaking, and they can be introducing water into the home where it shouldn't be introduced into the home, or they may not be getting it out of the home. So some of the other issues around water in particular can be gutters, being clogged up, or being, damaged to the point where the gutters just need repaired, or maybe they just need extensions added on to move that runoff, to move the water flow further away from the foundation, so it's not entering right into the home, where that basement or crawl space gets exposed at the foundation level. The other side of it too can be limited grading at the foundation. You can face issues with being in a very flat area. That can really exacerbate, well, how do we get rid of the bulk moisture? Installation of vapor retarders is kind of a method that's used to eliminate some of that groundwater from entering into the home. But again, you've got to try and figure out how to pull the funding in. So in my experience in the industry, one of the things that I've seen very common is contractors or weatherization agencies reaching across the aisle to try and pull in more funding. So let's say you're working in a utility program, and that utility program has a very limited health and safety budget. They want to do more work, but they just don't have the money. Well, sometimes there's organizations, especially you see this around DOE WAP agencies, quite a bit in weatherization, where they're trying to get resourceful and reaching into buckets of funding from elsewhere, from outside of that program, to bring it in and couple it with the actual weatherization program that they're working in. This is something that it requires a lot of effort, you know, and ultimately you've got to remember, I think to us, we get calloused in the industry. We get very callous to running into these barriers. We've seen it, we've been there, done that, and it's every time, you know, we just see this a lot. We see these barriers existing a lot. The challenge that I would make to those on the call is ultimately this, is to stop and think about what you're doing. Again, I remind you all that you're so much more than just weatherization contractors. You're humanitarians working and living in the communities of the people that you're helping. You've got to remember that sometimes it's going to take a little bit more effort with you. Sometimes it's a little bit more paperwork. Sometimes it's another hoop to jump through. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're creating a healthy home and you're changing the lives of the people that live in that home. So while, yes, I understand that it's difficult to work through these situations and it's really hard, it's more work to try and find these, you know, extra buckets of funding, remember what you're doing. You're changing lives through the work that you do every day. And that's something that's incredibly important to remember as you try and work through these barriers, and ultimately, you know, focus, whether it's on moisture or whether it's an electrical issue or whatever the case is, ultimately you're trying to help that occupant live a healthier, longer life.
All right, thanks, Shane. And another thing that comes to mind that's been a buzzword for a few years now is partnerships. I know that in New Jersey that when we run into these barriers, we look for partners. It could be a state agency, like a WAP agency. Often it's someone like Habitat for Humanity. They may actually have the funds and the wherewithal to take care of some of these issues, which then allows weatherization programs to go in and do the good work they do. So partnerships are actually going to be a key and something we should probably keep discussing. All right, so next we have our next healthy home principle is clean and pest free. Again, you know, the children and adults with respiratory illnesses such as asthma, they're at extreme risk for having attacks when you have pest infestations. And it's really the poo that's left behind by these creatures. So in a Healthy Homes program, it's going to focus on getting these homes pest-free without further damaging the health of the individuals, i.e. you can't use pesticides and you should not use you know, strong cleaning agents, or you know, you're not going to spray for roaches, etc. So in this case, a clean home helps to reduce pest infestation and exposure to contaminants. And the contaminants that we're concerned here is the feces left behind by rats, mice, and the frass left by cockroaches. Recent studies show that there is a causal effect relationship between exposure to mice and cockroaches. And again, you know, our concern at Isles when we did this training was that we didn't care how much medication you're going to send home with these children and adults. If this is what they were walking into, they were already, you know, defeated. They're not going to, the medication is not going to help. It's these triggers which have to be removed. And something that will come up more in Shane's discussion about weatherization. Things to remember is if you've got a seam or a crease the thickness of a coin, you're going to have cockroaches and other creatures, bugs that are going to get in. A mouse can get through a hole that's about the size of a dime, and a rat can get into a home with a hole about the size of a quarter. And I think anyone who does weatherization or home visits realizes that, you know, think of the number of holes that are in a house just from the cable guy who's been drilling holes for everyone who, you know, lived in a place over time. All the plumbing penetrations that come through a home. And even on the interior home, all the plumbing penetration, wiring penetrations that snake through the house. So that once you get an infestation of pests, it's just, you know, roadway for them to travel all through the house. Cleaning is going to be really important. And that's the thing that was stressed in the Healthy Homes, pest-free and clean. So homeowners can benefit from education and program referrals for assistance in creating and maintaining the healthy pest-free home. One of the things, if you're going to go in, as Shane pointed out earlier, you've got to get customer buy-in. And for cleaning and maintaining, this could be a really touchy, sensitive situation. You have to take into consider the clientele themselves. Sometimes it's religious considerations. Sometimes it's the ability of the occupants. And you really want to be very respectful of the occupants and, keep this couched strictly in the clear sense that, we're here to help you clean so that, your children or you can survive here healthily without these triggers. So cleaning was from the top to the bottom. You start at the top because remember, roaches are crawling along walls, mice and rats are crawling around baseboards. So you're cleaning from the top down, from the top of doors and the top of windows, down walls, and you're bringing everything down to the floor. Then you're going to use a vacuum, and you're going to vacuum slowly and methodically with a vacuum that's got to have a filter. That slow, methodic vacuuming is going to pick up all the materials that you knocked off of the walls and the baseboards and onto the floor. And once you've got that done, clean with soap and water. Do not use cleaners with VOCs and bleach. Bleach and VOCs are triggers for asthma and respiratory illness. You're just causing more harm than good at that point. Use bait for roaches, snap traps for mice and rats. We would hand out bags of combat for anyone who's doing a home visit with the instructions on this is how you place them, these are the places you want to put them. Cockroaches like moisture and dark spaces, so it's a no-brainer to put them under kitchen cabinets and bathroom cabinets where there might be moisture, and that's a great place for setting up some roach traps. These are things which you can instruct homeowners to do because they are not licensed pesticide materials. Snap traps for rats. Rats need to be killed immediately. Same thing with mice. Again, the more they're walking through the house, the more they're placing down pee and poo, which have allergens and actually carry viruses, which can cause respiratory diseases. Boric acid is actually another very useful material. It's a pest repellent. It's not a chemical that has to be licensed. You can buy it off the shelf. But boric acid along cracks and crevices on baseboards is really great for roach control. Shane's going to bring more weatherization impacts. Shane?
Yeah. So I think understanding that air sealing, with weatherization professionals, I think we think of air sealing, immediately we go with infiltration reduction. Immediately, that's where our minds go. We think about reducing the CFM50 on the house. We think about how do we get that blower door number lower. But again, when it comes to looking at this from the perspective of not only weatherization, but also establishing a healthy home, there's a great there's a great benefit in creating a healthy home from air sealing. So again, air sealing has positive impacts that are well beyond just comfort and efficiency gains. This includes increased comfort, reduced energy burdens, a decreased carbon footprint, reduced risk of disease, healthier occupants, pest infiltration reduction, and so much more. Again, I think, Charles, I think you made a great point when you try to give visualization of what size hole the pest needs to enter a home. A mouse needs a hole the size of a dime. A rat needs the size of a hole the size of a quarter. That's small. So when we're doing our blower door guided air sealing, we've got the foam tanks out, we're running through the house with a blower door running, trying to find those points, maybe using IR, maybe using smoke pens, but we're trying to find those points of air infiltration, the tiny ones, right? Not just in the attic plane either, but throughout the house. Think about the benefits of that, right? It's not just for the air infiltration. Obviously, that's the primary goal. But in addition to that, it's reducing that pest infiltration, which again is aligning with this healthy home principle.
And Shane, I think you could attest to this also. How many times have you been told by a customer after full weatherization was done that, gee, I don't have pests anymore. I don't have ants coming in. I don't have spiders in my basement.
Yeah.
Um, it really is a testimony to the good work, and I see where these two dovetail in really nicely.
Yeah, I can
Another
agree.
one that really does, yeah. So another one that dovetails really nicely together is this principle about ventilation. So in a healthy homes, you want to keep the house well ventilated, and studies show that the increase of fresh air supply in the home improves respiratory health. I think you'll all remember during COVID, one of the things which was stressed was increased ventilation in buildings, increased ventilation at home, more open windows in classrooms if the weather was. Those were some of the things you could do on your own to keep your house better maintained for indoor air quality for COVID. Well, that's also the case for a healthy home. So you can see in the graphic we have here is that ventilation falls into generally two categories. You have local spot ventilation, which are your bath fans and your kitchen fans. You see those documented in red here. That's to take moisture out of the home. And in the case of kitchen fans, you're going to take out micro contaminants and increase indoor air quality. The item in the attic appears to be an HRV, a heat recovery system. That is considered a whole house ventilation system. You can see air is being intaken in from the right side in lighter blue. It crosses over with the exchange of that air, which is heated. It takes some of that heat and it brings it back in as fresh air into the home as it exhausts the stale air out to the left. This is a really great strategy for controlling the airflow in the house. This is really like the penultimate ventilation. And Shane will go into more discussion about what we do. I can actually go through part of this, and I'm going to toss it off to you, Shane. Part of the spot ventilation includes bath fans, oven ranges, hoods, and dryer venting. Again, you remember, we're trying to, as our first tenet was to keep the house dry. It's not only bulk moisture coming from the outside, but controlling indoor moisture. And that's where, bath fans, oven ranges, your dryer venting, these are all sources that are located above high moisture areas, and it removes it to the outside. These have actually specific ways that are dealt with in weatherization programs. So I'm going to toss this off to Shane if you want to finish off this slide, Shane.
Yep. I just need to find that mute button. All right. Yeah, I think I for a moment I sort of wish we were all on camera so I could watch the eye rolls of the contractors on this call when we start talking about ventilation, right? We have talked about ASHRAE 622. We've talked about ventilation strategies in homes, and the reality of it is it's a very complicated process. But the most important piece of this thing is understanding that it's super important to ventilate a house right. One of the programs I work with, they have the saying to air seal tight and ventilate right. I'm sure you've all heard that saying before, as you've worked in this industry. But we're starting to get to the point where we're trusting the building science. And it's kind of a concept. It's kind of a foreign concept for some of us weatherization professionals, because we go, man, for years we weren't trying to get a house as tight as we could. We're trying to get it to this certain point, and now we're taking disregard. We're trying to get that home as tight as we can. So ventilation now is more important than it's ever been. So understanding that is critical. Charles, do you want to talk through this one on the bath fans?
Sure.
Actually, yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So, for both healthy homes and for weatherization programs, bath fans are a definitely must do. If you have a shower or an active bathtub where you're going to be creating a lot of moisture during bathing, you've got to get these things ventilated to the outside, because that moisture, the euphemism is, it's a fart fan. It's not. It's not for odor control. It's for moisture control. So bath fans that are going to be installed in a weatherization program should be ventilated out to 50 CFM of airflow. You can see this technician testing with an EXX box, finding out how much pressure and flow that fan has. If it tests out at 50, we're good. If it tests out less than 50, that's not the right fan for this. But even existing fans should have enough flow to do the minimum removal of air. So Shane, I think that you probably still do this every once in a while. If I'm in a house, I want to find out what an existing bath fan is capable of doing. I'm going to take a sheet of toilet paper from the roll, hold it up there, and if it gets pulled into the fan and stays, that fan has generally a fair amount of airflow and is not going to be a great concern. If it won't hold a single sheet of toilet paper, that's not a bad fan. That's just something that's spinning around and it's not doing the job it needs to remove moisture from that area.
Yeah.
And again, they should be very short, and they should be insulated in attics to create, keep from condensation, because you have moist air going through there. And they've got to go to an exterior, either the roof or the soffit, with a vent that has a one-way flapper to prevent airflow from coming back in.
Yeah, and I think the important side of that too, Charles, with when it comes to ventilation, is understanding ultimately this. Like, there are these great, rules of thumb, right? The toilet paper one, we've seen it, we've probably done it on this call, right? But the big thing that you should remember is that ultimately we have diagnostic tools. In the picture on that last slide, there's a picture of the exhaust fan flow meter on the right, and someone using a manometer, a little bit archaic right now, that DG 700. But ultimately, but ultimately, I think the most important thing to remember is that test, right? We need the data. You need the data to make an informed decision, and that data tells you so much. That piece of toilet paper says, "Yep, it's pulled air, it's okay," but it's not enough, right? We got to go one step further. We need to measure that exhaust fan flow, and we need to understand, what are the impacts of the ducting that we're installing? Is the ducting running through an unconditioned space? Is it insulated? Is it designed right? I mean, there's a lot of questions that ultimately that diagnostic testing will help you answer. So in addition to that, when we are weatherizing a home, when we're air sealing a home and making it airtight, you've got to use, again, the diagnostic testing. There's an initial set of diagnostic tests that goes on when we start, when we do that audit evaluation. The auditors, right? For those on the call, I'm still a recovering auditor. I've been doing this for a long time, and that's where I cut my teeth into weatherization, and weatherization found me and sort of threw me into this role as an energy auditor. But with that in mind, ultimately, your energy auditor is the person going out doing the initial assessment of the home. They're testing everything, right? They're doing that combustion safety test. They're doing blower door diagnostics. They're doing zone pressure diagnostics, maybe even series leakage with garage testing. They're trying to, so why? That's the question to ask, is why are we doing all this testing? Well, ultimately, we're doing the diagnostic testing in order to understand what's happening in the house. But we don't stop there, right? So, for those BPI professionals that are on this call, you all know that, hey, when we do the audit, we've got to test. When we install measures, we have to test in. And when we are finished installing those measures, we need to test out. Well, why? Well, because conditions in the house change through that whole process. Sometimes an energy audit evaluation can happen a month, 2 months, maybe longer, 3 months, until we're actually in that house installing measures. Homeowners change things. You all know that. Things change. Their cousin Vinny is going to remodel the bathroom for them. And cousin Vinny decided to put a drop tile ceiling in the bathroom and left a 3-foot gaping hole into the attic. It's happened. So that's why we do these testing. We need to understand how the conditions in the home are changing. But then when we get to the end, we're ensuring, we do that post-test. We're ensuring that the house is safe, and we're measuring our results. So we're showing everybody, hey, look, this is how much we've reduced the air leakage in this home. And we're using that to educate our customers, to explain, this is how we're making your home healthier. You've reduced the air infiltration in the home. which means you've reduced the number of times the air exchanges per hour in the home. So you're reducing the ACH. In Pennsylvania right now, current building code requires a home to leak no more than 3 ACH 50 in a brand new home built today in the state of Pennsylvania. That's a pretty tight house. One would, for the general public. For us in this industry, yeah, there's room for improvement, right? But some of these houses in the utility programs, or even DOE WAP, or state-funded weatherization programs or federal programs, they are seeing houses that are 17 ACH 50 when they start. That is breeding problems. It's creating serious health concerns. It's creating serious energy burdens, and it's making a bad problem way worse. So the idea behind it is, again, we're using these diagnostic tools so that we can best serve these customers and figure out the best strategy for not only air sealing, but the ventilation as well.
Right, and we're going to be talking more about that in some future slides, Shane. And do you want to say one last thing about ASHRAE?
Yeah, everybody's favorite subject, right? I know my WAP contractors on the call right now are cringing at this site, but don't, right? This is good. So for those that may not be familiar, this is the ASHRAE red tool calculator for ASHRAE 622. Typically, and I'm painting with a very broad brush here, most programs use ASHRAE 622 as the ventilation standard for the programs. The state uses it, each of the states, so it's really done, it's mandated on a federal level for DOE WAP, and even a lot of the utility programs have adapted ASHRAE 622. These tools, so RED is a freeware tool that is provided to contractors to calculate out the need for ventilation. And the big thing that I want to say when it comes to ventilation standards, especially around ASHRAE 622, is ultimately this: trust the science. The science of the ventilation strategy in a home will guide you, and it will make that home healthier if you just follow the metrics that are coming out of this calculator. It's not going to do the ventilation for you, right? You got to figure that part out. But this is going to say what the minimum ventilation required is. So that's something that again, I can't stress that enough, is that ultimately you've got to trust the science and talk to the occupants. I think that's one of the most common issues that we see when we are talking ventilation strategies to customers. And even from the inspection, Charles, think about all the inspections you've done. You go out to a customer's home and you say, hey, customer, this contractor installed a ventilation strategy here. Looks like they put an ASHRAE time fan in the bathroom. Do you have any questions about it? Yeah, I don't understand why that thing runs all the time. And so what that means is that the customer doesn't understand why that's needed. So again, it comes down to education. Now, look, I understand sometimes it's really hard to get a low-income weatherization customer to engage with you. You're not just an energy auditor. You're not just a crew lead, right? In a lot of ways, you're a salesperson. So you have to sell them the idea of how do you, address the ventilation and why you're putting that ventilation in. You have to explain it, ask them questions, and have them ask you questions. Invest in that customer. I was just at the National Hood Performance Conference in Minneapolis with the Building Performance Association, and I was presenting in a room of about 400 contractors, 400 people that work for various agencies or contractors or utilities, right? The big thing that the most common thing is that, it's amazing. The issues that we deem as issues with our customers, they're just everywhere. A weatherization customer in Pennsylvania and one in Washington State, they battle the same issues. Getting a customer away from Jerry Springer for a minute so that you can sit and talk to them is difficult. But if you invest in them, we're not going to be going back to that house 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 times. We're going to do it right the next time. I appreciate this industry so much, and I appreciate, in the 80s, we're a young industry. In the 80s, we started, and but again, we're back at those same houses again. And the question is why? Maybe it's budget, maybe it's just, being handcuffed and not being able to fully do what we know needs done, and the science is showing. But ultimately, it has to come down to, we've got to care about every job that we're doing. We got to slow down and work through it and understand that, yes, ASHRAE 622 is hard to navigate at times. To put a ventilation strategy in is difficult. But understand that if we air seal that house as tight as we can get it, and we put a proper ventilation strategy in, we're ultimately making that home healthier, and you're changing someone's life. Again, that's something to remember as you get through it. And ultimately, again, if you take anything off of this slide, trust the science. It works. All right, Charles, I'll get off my ASHRAE soapbox.
All right, Shane. So our next principle is contaminant-free. So again, some of the issues with homes is that you have radon penetration through soil gases. You've got existing friable asbestos on steam pipes. CO is always an issue if you have gas combustion appliances, and lead. So a lot of the homes that we work in both Healthy Homes and Weatherization were built pre-1978. So there may be asbestos, and most likely the paint is going to be lead paint. Lead is a problem because, as you know, a lot of children every year develop emotional and cognitive issues from ingesting lead paint, and probably more in terms of ingesting dust from the sliding up and down and the opening and closing of windows and doors. These toxic materials should be identified at any visit that is being done by a social worker, health worker, or a home inspector. Other chemicals that are at issue are volatile organic compounds, such as paints, chemicals, and things that are stored in houses when they should be stored outside the house. Forever chemicals like PFAS are in products, but they're also in water. And environmental tobacco smoke was a real key on the Healthy Homes program, not so much for a weatherization program, because secondhand smoke was always dangerous for children. Secondhand smoke for children who have asthma is a direct trigger, and you've got to keep the indoor air quality better than the outdoor air quality. Weatherization program impacts. Shane, I'm going to toss this off to you. Again, CO monitoring is one of the things that should be done in a home, and Shane's going to explain more about that.
Yeah, and I think the big thing to understand is that, for the BPI certified contractors that are in this call or in this webinar, the big thing to remember is that CO monitoring throughout the entire evaluation and measure installation is required in any weatherization program. As a BPI standard, even if those standards of the program that you're working in do not require that, your BPI certification requires that. So the big thing that you need to take away from this slide is understanding that we have to have continuous monitoring of ambient CO in both the combustion appliance zone and throughout the home. Just like when you're doing your BPI certification exam, you have to do that, and you have to demonstrate this. You have to do it in every home that you're working in. Gas leak detection, verification, and repair, working through those gas leaks, and combustion safety testing, which, gas leak detection is part of that. So again, it's as you're working through trying to ensure that you're creating that healthy home through the program that you're working in, you have to actually take these measurements. And this isn't just a real quick disclaimer. This isn't just to check off a box. This is to actually understand, are we leaving that home safe? I mean, if you look in the last year, we've seen several homes in Philadelphia. There was a block, actually, I think about 7 months ago right now, a row home block that exploded because of a gas leak. So that gas leak, sure, it's another gas leak test that you've got to complete, but you've got to understand that we do that for a reason. We do those tests to to ensure the safety of the occupants of that home. So, and just again, just from BPI, ambient CO levels above those thresholds of 35 ppm, they require that the testing is stopped and ventilated to fresh air, and it's got to be reported to that gas utility immediately.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. And again, CO poisoning is a real thing in the United States. So making sure that there are active CO alarms in a home is also a tenet of both healthy homes and weatherization. CO alarms can be either hardwired or battery operated. They should be checked for their date of manufacture. General rule of thumb is that units that are battery operated should have a 5 to 7 year lifespan. After 7 years, they become unreliable. But there are now 10-year sealed units, sealed battery units that will have a 10-year life. These should be tested. Training should be supplied to the customers to test these at least once a year, but I would prefer to do it twice a year. We change clocks every spring and every fall. Certain maintenance things should happen in a building, and fresh batteries for CO and smoke alarms should be installed, and the test button should be hit to make sure that they are actively working. Our next principle is going to be maintained. So poorly maintained homes, again, we're going full circle, and you can see how, as Shane pointed out earlier, everything's connected. That's a building science principle, but that's also a principle of this healthy homes. Everything's connected. So if you don't keep the moisture out and you don't keep the house dry, you've got pest problems. If you don't maintain the house, or if you have constant moisture and condensation on windows, you're going to have peeling lead paint in older houses. That is something which affects 535,000 children annually. That's a huge burden on children in the United States. So air infiltration through building components like crawl spaces, basements, and exterior walls, and especially walls that are common with a garage where a car is being parked. These are avenues for dust, pollen, soil gases, and generally unhealthy air. We talked about ventilation. Ventilation is to control where the air is coming through. You don't want the air to be coming through these unfiltered areas where you're going to be bringing contaminants in. And if you have, again, we talked about the fact that if you have kind of a Swiss cheese shell, you're going to have avenues for pests entering the home. So Shane, the weatherization impacts would be what?
Yeah, so the weatherization impacts, essentially, you got to remember, weatherization programs are ultimately going to recommend aggressive air sealing of the building structure and the components, right? We're targeting places like attics, basements or crawl space perimeters, rim joists, band joists where they meet that foundation, gaps around entry doors and windows, gaps, this is that blower door guided air sealing, gaps around wire and plumbing penetrations, your top plates in the attic, chaseways, electrical and plumbing penetrations through that attic plane. Common walls and ceiling connections with a conditioned space. There's ultimately it comes down to, we've got to define that pressure envelope and aggressively attack the air sealing in a home based on the diagnostic data that we're finding from our blower door equipment. So let's go ahead to that next slide here. So in addition to that, really speaking on the diagnostics, if you haven't picked that up by now, I'm a big fan of diagnostic testing because it gives us the data. That data gives us the information that we're seeking to develop a strategy to make a customer's home more energy efficient and ultimately healthier. So auditors and crews, again, both have this diagnostic tools. They have these diagnostic tools that allow them to document issues. Blower door testing can document how much air flows through the home. A smoke stick can show drafts and air leakage. An IR camera, when used in combination with a blower door, can show infiltration that's really hard to see with just the naked eye. So, if you're not using IR to air seal an attic plane or find those top plates, find the chaseways, you should try it. It really works wonders, and we'd be happy to talk more about that at the end of this if anybody has questions on how to integrate IR into blower door diagnostics.
Right, and one other thing about IR, it's an excellent way to identify moisture issues.
That's right.
And since moisture issues is where we started, we're coming back full circle to that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
All right, now we have another principle is going to be about thermally controlled. So again, tenants and homeowners at risk of various health problems related to prolonged exposure to excess heat and cold. I can't tell you how many homes that I've gone in to do audits where the family's all huddled on the couch, and it's like, well, do you have the heat on? We haven't had heat in a year. And it's sad, but they have not had heat for a year. So it's really important to take care of heating systems, but it's also important to make sure that the heat that the customer's spending to put in there is well maintained. So we're going to talk about the pressure boundary. Everything that Shane's been describing about air sealing is to create the pressure boundary around the areas that the customer lives in and heats. As you can see, we've got the attic ceiling, or the ceiling that connects with the attic. This wall, we've got a blind attic that we're going to separate out. A wall here, we're going to separate out the garage because we don't want the garage and contaminants to come into the house. It goes into the basement and up the far wall. So that's the pressure boundary, and that's where we want to make sure that we control the airflow coming in for both pests, for comfort, and to maintain heat in the home. But there's also the thermal boundary, which aligns and is contiguous with it. That pressure boundary is just to stop airflow. Now what you want to do is you want to maintain that heat, and you're going to maintain that heat by putting the proper amount of insulation along that pressure boundary. In walls, it's generally R11 to R13. In a basement, you might actually use some spray foam to increase the thermal boundary. An attic, the ceiling above a car might be 10 inches deep. You might be able to get R30 dense packed insulation in there. Same thing with the wall. And these blind attics will also be separated out. And an attic is going to have a minimum of R38 per some of the, per New Jersey's Comfort Partners program. We want to make sure that's to R38, but it could go as far as R49. So Shane, for weatherization, if you'd like to take over the impacts of insulation.
I think, we're approaching the tail end here. We got about 7 minutes left, and so the big takeaway to understanding, from Charles's last slide is ultimately this: as an energy professional, you determine what the pressure and thermal envelope looks like, and you have to ensure that those are aligned. So ultimately, when it comes to air sealing, what kind of measures are we seeing installed? The foam, we're making sure that pressure plane is sealed up prior to insulating. After that air sealing is completed, then we add the insulation and introduce the thermal boundary alignment. This can be accomplished through blown cellulose or fiberglass bat insulation in attics. It can be dense packed cellulose in an empty exterior wall cavities, or spray foam insulation in crawl spaces, ceilings, and walls. And again, something that we see done is spray foam used in an attic plane to accomplish both instances at once. Aligning that pressure and thermal envelope. The big takeaway to remember, again, just a reiteration of it, is that the pressure and thermal boundaries must be aligned, and they have to be continuous to achieve both comfort and energy savings. Ultimately, that's how you're going to create that healthy home.
Excellent. Thanks, Shane. And we're getting down to the end. Our second to last principle is going to be accessibility. So sometimes you have to modify these homes. So remember, in both Healthy Homes and in Comfort Partners, or weatherization programs in general, often the clientele is elderly. In Healthy Homes, they're often infirm. So in order for them to have a reasonable quality of life to maintain with the activity level that they're able to do, you may actually have to make structural changes to the home. So as you can see, if you've got a staircase that the homeowner is not safe getting out of their front door, they may not go out their front door. They may not go for groceries. They may not go for paper. They don't go out to see friends. So they have reduced physical activity. That's not healthy. They may suffer trips and falls. That could be a death sentence, depending on their age and their infirmness. It isolates them from family and friends, which is going to lead to poor mental health. And in new home designs, as you can see, having ramps and good entryways is essential for the homeowners or the occupants to be able to move about safely outside their home and keep up a level of activity to the point of their health can maintain. And weatherization impacts here, Shane?
Yeah, thanks, Charles. So again, weatherization programs may support spending program funds on repairs that ultimately allow energy saving measures to be installed. In addition to those energy saving measures, sometimes we have to put in those health and safety measures. That could be handrails for elderly. I know that this is something that Habitat does. Repair the rotten floors to allow for replacement of HVAC equipment. Modifying house wiring to allow the install of the high efficiency measures, abating that knob and tube wiring, repairing the roof leaks. Ultimately, if it's a barrier, there's a potential way that you can coordinate that funding and use it, from the health and safety bucket, so to speak. So I'd encourage, just the takeaway from this slide, from my opinion, is just I would encourage you to get creative and talk to your program managers, talk to the folks that are the decision makers in the programs you work with to figure out how you can utilize that health and safety budget to accomplish these issues or get through these types of issues and so many more.
Okay, excellent. And our last topic is affordability. So I think that everyone's been seeing in the news that there's a housing shortage. It's become extremely difficult to find cost-effective housing. This is a burden, and if our clientele is already cash burdened, this is the kind of stuff where they're making tentatively bad decisions about how to spend their money because it's just not enough there. So some of our customers are severely cost burdened, where they're spending more than 50% of their income on rent alone, which leaves very little for education, health spending, and, as we're pointing out, maintenance of their homes. So high housing cost burden is difficult paying rents and mortgages, possibility of evictions or foreclosures, frequently moving, overcrowding, many members of a home living in the same small crowded space, and in some cases leads to homelessness. So again, in the Healthy Homes program, these high housing costs may be able to be ameliorated by other programs, but this is actually something which is going to take both local, community, state, and national changes to get more affordable houses in the places where people need it. That's been the conversation going on lately. Shane, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you got it, Charles. I think that's good.
And your last one here, Shane, I'm just going to do this for you, is that weatherization programs by design will reduce costs required to heat and cool a home. So that's one of the impacts that we can do for making houses more affordable and to get our customers at least a little bit, a little alleviation on their spending. So replacement of older and inefficient HVAC equipment with high efficiency units saves money. Air sealing and insulation measures to reduce customers' energy use. That's going to provide better comfort and save on their energy bills. Install of baseboard measures such as LED lighting, smart thermostats, replacement of inefficient refrigerators and freezers. This is significantly going to help reduce their electric use. And utilities have set aside funding with utility payments for most of their most vulnerable customers. So there are programs that auditors and inspectors can steer the customers to, like USF, LIHEAP, and programs like that, which are set up. It's just a matter of getting the customer to buy in put in the application to see whether they qualify. So that's the presentation in its total. The resources we used were the website for the National Center for Healthy Homes.org, WEPI.org, which is most of what the weatherization information that was contained here. And some statistics on water damage were from a Water Damage Statistics 2024 by rubyhome.com. So I want to thank you all. We hit it right on time. Chris, I'm sorry we didn't have time for questions. How would you like to move forward on that aspect?
Can we keep it open just for a few minutes to answer any, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, if people are willing to stay for questions, we can definitely do that. Currently, in the posted questions, there was one about sharing a link to the red tool, which it looks like Shane, you answered, so the link is there. And then we just had one question that was pre-submitted. So as long as it's cool with Charles and Shane, I guess we could keep going for a little bit for any questions that attendees may have.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, let's go into OT.
Okay.
I'm good.
Yeah.
So the pre-submitted question that we received was, are vapor diffusion ports suitable for climate zone 4A?
Yeah, let me pull up my notes here from that. I'm going to take that one, Charles. This question, the short answer, I did some research, and the person that asked this question, I appreciate this question very much. So I did some research and I consulted a couple different people, not only internally here at PSD, but externally. I spoke to a former colleague of mine, Mike Turns, who works for the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. So the short answer is the only reference to vapor diffusion ports in the current code is IRC R806.5. Which is an option for unvented attics using air permeable insulation in climate zones 1, 2, and 3. So the reason that it specifies climate zone 1, 2, and 3 is because it's not super applicable in colder climates due to the increased condensation potential in cold weather. Ultimately, what it comes down to is if you install that ridge vent and you're leaking hot, moist air out of the house, and it's going to escape. We can't have a house that's completely airtight where the attic plane is not going to allow any of the inside air to get out. The concern is mostly in the wintertime because what's going to happen is you're going to get that hot air from in the house that contains the moisture. It's going to escape. And with a ridge vent, you're going to get condensation, and that could occur. There's a ton of theory around this. It could either occur inside that attic space, or it could occur outside and create things like ice damming. So that's ultimately why the code's set up that way. But again, if you have additional questions around some of that, there is a great resource with the Building America Solutions Center through PNNL, and I will drop that link into the general chat along with sort of the code reference for this. So again, Emma, I appreciate this question, and if you have any further commentary, we can Chris, I'm not sure how to unmute everybody on here, but if we want to do that, we're more than I'm more than happy to do that now.
Okay, I can let me see if I can unmute everyone.
Okay, so you should have that option to unmute now, self unmute. Maybe.
Shane, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm able to unmute.
Okay. Okay, so if you have any questions, that's showing it's working, I believe. So if you have any questions, feel free to come off of mute. Emma, I know that you were the submitter of that question. I hope that, and I think you're dropped off the call, actually. So yeah, that's okay. we can send that email. Anybody else have any other questions for us as we're on here? Okay, I'm not seeing any more coming in. Chris, I can work with you to send that email out for the follow-up to answer that question after the webinar. But yeah, Chris, I'd just like to thank you for putting this webinar on and coordinating the efforts and giving Charles and I the space to do this presentation. We appreciate it.
No problem. Well, I just want to reiterate again, thank you everybody who attended, and hope you guys have a great rest of your day.